In the spring of 2020, our lives shifted in a way unimaginable with the onset of the COVID pandemic. The arts community was among the most affected by the shutdown, isolating artists from audiences, colleagues, and opportunities to sell their work in traditional ways. But ingenuity won, and many artists found new ways to connect and also share their work.
Our local community of Cape Ann met the challenge by taking advantage of new media formats that offered a platform to artists for sharing their artistic journey and work. This took the form of Cape Ann ArtWaves, a bi-weekly video program that captured the essence of this uncertain time in our local art scene, continuing beyond the pandemic through January of 2023. As co-creators, co-hosts, and co-producers, Christine Fisher and Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco, both artists, are proud to present the highlights of the 75-plus interviews that capture this critical moment in history and the rich stories of the artists, gallerists, and curators from across the spectrum.
We are honored to share this compendium of highlights to broaden the reach of these artists and continue our rich heritage as an arts destination. Many thanks to the Cape Ann Museum for becoming the official steward of these stories for future generations, and to the Cape Ann Savings Bank for the financial support to create this video. We hope the videos will enhance the effort to brand Cape Ann as a vibrant, forward-looking arts community building on its rich heritage for generations to come.
I started making wall pieces just on my own, and those became more inspired by the quarries, so that I would roll out a big slab of clay and heavily texture it. And that's a lot of fun. So I play all different kinds of tools. I mean, things you wouldn't think of. The little edge of a cardboard box that has all those little cells. So press it into the clay, you get that kind of pattern, and it can look grass or all different kinds of things.
My practice is my soul. And I began this interview with you saying that I always wanted to be an artist. Well, I taught for 30 years. I had to wait until I was in my 60s and retired in 2012 when I went back to Montserrat. That's a lot of years of pent up energy and thoughts and feelings that I wanted to express. And I think everybody has a need to express.
I like the story about how, really describes me straddling the two worlds in that image, that when I would show it to the guys in the auto body shop, they would say, what is this, an OSHA violation? Is this an insurance claim? And then I'd show it at school and people would be waxing on about how it looked like a death chamber and it looked like an operating room, and just these crazy, completely opposite takes on the same image.
I like to say that my work talks about time, because I consider time in all the work that I've done previously and right up to the newest work that I'll show you today. It speaks about time in the greatest and the smallest sense of the word, and to do that I use ice, fossils, minerals, and plaster in photography and sculpture to express those ideas. So what I'm trying to say is to set the importance that we think of our own life on a scale of what we do and what we accomplish against how relatively insignificant we are on the larger scale. And in order to do that, I place the photography and the sculptures side by side and they speak to one another.
One class I was in with her, I think we'll probably look at a painting. I started painting and I did this portrait. And I had been trained in portraits. My art classes all through being a kid were portraits and that sort of work. And I did this portrait of my husband.
Oh yes, and we're gonna have that up on the screen right now. So tell us a little bit about the sketch of Steve.
Yeah, well, what's funny is I almost felt awkward doing it. I felt like, I haven't painted forever. And I had a picture in my wallet. I just grabbed the picture I had of him and I was like, gosh, I'm gonna do this. And I painted it. And using acrylics, which I hadn't ever used before. Honestly, I'd worked with oils.
Wow.
And it I looked at it and I'm like, oh, wow, I still can do this. Like, now I look at it, there's some things, you're always neurotic, like might change this, that, but I really was so happy with it, the immediacy, and that I got a likeness, which is always really important to me to get, like, it's him, it's not his brother, it's not his cousin, someone who looks sort of like him, it was him.
I do it partly too because everything in life, people, places, things, we're all in a state of transformation. Nothing stays still. And I guess it's part of my background as a conservator, wanting to preserve things. And so I know the architecture in this piece, Escape from Essex, will be threatened with development and everything else. And I wanted to capture it. Because it meant so much to me. So, that's part of my honoring places, honoring artists, and it ties in actually very well, not only with where I've lived, but also the work that I do.
I love the diversity of working. I couldn't do the same thing over and over. I couldn't use the same material. I love to be challenged. I love to research new ideas, new materials, and if the opportunity avails itself, then I'll take it. I'm not afraid. I'm willing to take risks.
The interconnectedness of all beings, the fragility of life, love, random acts of kindness. There's enough malice and menace in the world that I try to focus on the goodness and finding something, the good moments. We don't need to travel overseas to have an adventure. We can have it right in our backyard in everyday moments, and just observing everyday moments, and whether it's a complete stranger or a loved one, I feel like it's all an experience that's buried in us somewhere. And that's what comes out, is in the mind's eye, and what comes out in the process through that tapping into the zone and the subconscious.
Yeah. My house and garden, if you will, it's because I can become emotionally attached to those places. That's what I want to paint. It's part of me. So when I pass quickly through places and I do a little sketch of something that's useful, but it's not the same type of work as when I've lived somewhere for a while. So when I was living in Beverly on campus at the Waring School, it was trees. And that has always been a theme for me, living there in the woods.
Just continuing to do it, I just realized that, wow, there's something really almost transcendent about this space. In one of my statements, I kind of done a little research, and in Celtic culture, there are these thin spaces which bring heaven and earth very close. It kind of lifts that veil, as it were. And that's kind of the sense I get from this space, the atmosphere, that void between water and sky, and then, where they come together, and it can be so crisp or it can be so blurred. It's moody, and it's constantly changing, and the light is changing, the atmosphere is changing, the water is, it's ebbing and flowing, and all of that, is very parallel to our existence as humans. All of those things, they translate quite well into our existence.
Point Quarry is a place I go to often. I probably return at least at some point every year to paint there. I used to bring my classes there too. People loved it. It's so beautiful, it's so peaceful, and these quarry rocks are just so. They just speak to me in some way. No matter what angle of the quarry I end up doing. Sometimes I'll do the whole thing. Sometimes I just do a tiny little segment of it.
The advice that I would give to young artists that are sort of looking at the possibility for careers. When I was young, I thought that if you were a creative person, the only thing that you could do was paint oil paintings or watercolors. And I didn't realize, as young as I was, the breadth of creative opportunities that are out there for people?
I think we both made the realization, I certainly did, that you get asked a lot when you're doing let's just say somebody hired me to do a painting for their house or whatever, and it was my mural, but they want it for their house. Most of the time they have some comments about what they want you to change and how they want it to fit. And it ends up not really being your true expression of artwork. And this is not true in every case, but this is a general takeaway. And so at the time I had an idea of just kind of like, well, why don't we create a business that's less about like Dana and more about like whatever this company is, and we can use creative skills. Like I've been working in design forever. We can both paint. We've worked collaboratively forever to collaborate with the client, make something that they want, say yes to all their changes as best we can, and not worry about how that reflects back on our personal portfolio, but create a new portfolio of kind of design works for clients. So
there are artists who wrestle with the muse anew with each piece or each series. And in that sense, they're always on the move. They're always incorporating new influences, new ideas about the world as we age and as the world changes. And I think artists who stop at a certain point, they find success and then repeat, have become craftsmen. And it doesn't mean they're not artists. And, I don't deny that term to anybody, but I'm interested in that art that's going to move and develop over a whole career as well, and not just stop with something that satisfies at the moment.
Because a lot of those pieces that came from Africa were like not contained in like a square, but were freer than that. And also used a lot of textile and different kinds of things. So he was quite influential on me, and in that regard, I was beginning to get ideas just around that time about what is called sculpture. Now it's important because the sculpture things that I started to do in Washington were paper. Right. The reason I want paper rather than metal and wood, I want the physical lightness of it.
So this is a piece I did this winter when we were doing 10 sessions of creative community through Zoom. And I was really inspired to do a lot of still life work. And what's really fun is I feel it's almost like jazz or impromptu. So I can really riff on the color, and one of the things I was really pushing, which is another theme, is using shadows. And that's been there through my whole career. Shadows really anchor. And I think that also relates to spirituality. It's not there, but it's there. And it gives an indication of something.
But my goal really is just to take the world that I live in the way that I think I see it, and the way I, as best as I can determine, feel it, and to present it to you for consideration. I get to hold up these little mini versions of the world, put them on my walls and say, well, what do you think? What do you feel? How do you respond to color? How do you respond to light? How do you respond to subject matter? And that allows it to be a conversation, which to me is what good art should be, is an invitation to people to engage themselves in the world they live in.
When you are inspired from your heart, it comes out in your artwork. Someone can suggest, could you please do a picture of X, Y, or Z? But when it comes from inside here, it's all there, and the work is not work, it's a joy.
I find myself looking at things all the time in a different way. I might see a street sign and I change the words around just automatically in my mind to make it, funny or edgy. I see objects all the time, and I change them in my mind of how I want to see them in a different, venue. I'm overwhelmed with the creative thoughts that are in my mind sometimes. It gets to me because I can't execute them all.
So at university, I was encouraged to sort of step outside of the box. The painting here features a trip that I made in the mid-1990s during a downtime one summer to Europe. And this shows a scene in Barcelona. And you can see the beginnings of my interest in abstraction that was starting to come through. And so I wanted just to include that as an example of where I began, and as sort of a starting off point for the later work that we'll talk about today.
Yes, I love it. Very Hopper-esque. And this is a perfect jumping off point. You mentioned Europe. You mentioned your stint in Europe. Let's talk about a very pivotal time in your life when you moved to Venice and began to work with the Peggy Guggenheim Museum. Talk to us about that.
Yes, it was a great privilege. I was invited to work at the Guggenheim Museum as an intern initially. And it was just a wonderful experience. There was no hardship, of course, to spend at that point 3 months in Venice as an amazing and inspirational city. And what I loved about the experience, of course, was that a bit like Gloucester, it's very place-based in terms of the city in Venice and here in Gloucester has been the catalyst for so much creative work and visual art as well.
Still life and portraiture, I mean, fundamentally for me, are really about, I feel like I often use the word sculptural, like they are physical masses that are made up of planes and have volume. And I mean, my work is so much about having, painting light as it sort of comes across those forms. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been drawn to these sorts of subjects more so than landscape.
Thank you to the thousands of viewers that have enjoyed Cape Ann ArtWaves since its inception in March of 2020 on Channel 12, 1623 Studios Media, and YouTube. ArtWaves can now be found in the digital library of the Cape Ann Museum housed on Vimeo. Episodes will be available by year. Each video includes a list of artists interviewed in that calendar year. Special thanks to our amazing sponsors, videographer Andrews Johnson, musicians Steve Lacey and Pat Verga, graphic designer Linda Stockman, the team at 1623 and Sea Arts colleagues who supported this program since the beginning.